case. The state calling your name, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state calls Dr. Pedrag Bulic.
Dr. Bulic, good afternoon. If you could take the witness stand over here. Have you remain standing when you get there. Raise your right hand, please.
Do you solemnly swear and affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Good to see you. State counsel, you may proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Could you introduce yourself to the jury?
I'm the Chief Medical Examiner for 3 counties, as for St. John's, Putnam, and Flagler. We are located in St. Augustine. My name is Pedrag Bulic, P-R-E-D-R-A-G, and the last name is B-U-L-I-C.
Thank you, Doctor. You said that you are the Chief Medical Examiner for St. Johns County as well as some of the surrounding counties, correct?
Yes.
And that office is located here in St. Augustine?
Yes.
How long have you been the Chief Medical Examiner for this area?
Since May 2011.
And what are your duties as the Chief Medical Examiner?
My duties are to supervise the staff and to basically run the office of the medical examiner. Also, the main part of my duties is to perform autopsies and to determine the cause and manner of death in certain scenarios, certain situations where by law is required.
Are you a duly licensed physician in the state of Florida?
Yes, I am.
Can you just briefly describe your educational background as it relates to what you do?
Okay. I'm a medical doctor licensed to practice medicine in Florida. I also have a board certification, and it's a double board certification in forensic pathology and surgical pathology. I completed a fellowship in forensic pathology in Fort Lauderdale, and then after that I was hired to do a job as an associate medical examiner in Volusia and Seminole counties prior this position that I have right now. And I also completed a residency in clinical and anatomic pathology in Worcester, Massachusetts. That was for 5 years duration. And prior to that, I was emergency room physician in former Yugoslavia.
And medical school?
A medical school I completed in Belgrade, that's also in former Yugoslavia.
And you said that you were board certified in one of the areas was forensic pathology. Is that correct?
Yes.
How long have you worked as a pathologist?
I worked as a pathologist since 2007.
Okay, so for a little over 10 years, is that correct?
Yes.
And we use that term pathology, and then you also use the term forensic pathology. Can you explain what those terms mean?
Yes. Well, first, medical doctor has to go into the residency training in order to become specialized. So one of the specialties is pathology. It's very broad medical specialty, and more narrow specialties are called fellowships. And so if a pathologist desires to go into a more narrow field, then he will choose a fellowship. And that's what forensic pathology is. It's a fellowship of a general pathology. So it's general pathology is basically a medical branch that is concerned about etiology or the cause of diseases, and also to establish diagnoses. So that's what pathology is. It's not a therapeutic branch of medicine. Pathology does not treat diseases. It's more about diagnostics and making the right diagnosis on whether the patient is alive or deceased. Forensic pathology is more narrow, and it's concerned about determining the cause and manner of death in medical legal cases.
Now, you said that one of the ways that you go about your work in determining cause and manner of deaths are through the performance of autopsies. Is that correct?
Yes.
And can you estimate approximately how many autopsies you have performed in your career?
Approximately 4,000.
Have you ever testified in court as an expert in forensic pathology?
Yes.
And approximately how many times?
I would say about close to 200 times.
Dr. Bulic, were you working in the medical examiner's office here in St. Augustine on August the 28th of 2015?
Yes, I was.
And did you conduct 2 autopsies on that particular day on 2 individuals who were identified to you as Amanda Colley and Lindy Dobbins?
Yes.
Were there any other law enforcement personnel, other individuals who were present at that autopsy?
Yes, they were.
And were one of those individuals Christine Keegan with the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office?
I believe so, but I would have to look at my report.
Okay.
It's written in there.
Do you have it with you, Doctor?
Yes.
Okay, you could do that, please. Thank you.
Yes, she was there.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. Was it your understanding, Dr. Bulic, that both Ms. Colley and Ms. Dobbins were killed the day prior to you conducting your autopsies?
Yes, that was my understanding.
And was your observations of their bodies consistent with that information?
Yes.
So, Dr. Bulic, when we talk about an autopsy, can you kind of explain to us sort of the process of an autopsy? What it is that you, is there a method or a process that you undergo sort of from A to Z when you conduct these types of examinations?
The autopsy is a surgical procedure that is performed by a qualified physician, usually either general pathologist, or if it comes to cases such as murder and homicide, and it has to be the forensic pathologist, not even a general pathologist can do that. And it's always standardized. The procedure is very much standardized so that nothing would be amiss. It usually starts by external observation, photographing, collecting the evidence, then really washing the body thoroughly to remove all kinds of debris or blood so that the injuries can be also better observed and photographed. And after all that is then the pathologist or forensic pathologist continues with internal observation, which is really cutting the body in a certain way and finding out anything that is wrong with the decedent.
So you had indicated that part of that process is to photograph the body, is that correct?
Yes.
And you do that for every step of the process, is that correct?
That's correct. Very thorough photographs are made at the moment the body bag is opened, and then we proceed in a step manner. Basically, little by little, we are uncovering the evidence.
And were photographs taken during the autopsies of Amanda Colley and Lindy Dobbins?
Yes.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You got it.
Dr. Bulic, I'm showing you what's been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit HH1, which is a CD, as well as HH2, which is a printout of the items on that CD. Do you recognize that, sir?
Yes, I do.
All right, and is this a disc containing photographs from the autopsy that you conducted on August the 28th of 2015?
Yes.
You've had an opportunity to review the photographs on this disc?
Yes.
And are the photographs on this disc, as well as in this printout here, fair and accurate depictions of the autopsy that you conducted on that day?
Yes, they are.
Your Honor, at this time, the State would offer States HH1 and HH2 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Without objection, that we receive the state's Positive Exhibit 37.
Dr. Bulic, between the two, between Amanda Colley and Lindy Dobbins, which autopsy did you conduct first?
I conducted Ms. Dobbins first. I'm sorry, I said that wrong.
Okay.
Actually, it was looking at the time. I conducted Ms. Colley first at 10 o'clock
Yes, sir.
on the 28th, August the 28th.
Yes, sir.
And that took about 4 hours to complete. And then the second autopsy was Ms. Dobbins started at 2 o'clock p.m.
Thank you, Doctor. Was the body of Amanda Colley clothed when you first received it?
I'm sorry, was it what?
Was the body of Amanda Colley clothed when you first observed it?
Yes.
Okay. And what was she wearing when you received her body?
She had a t-shirt, she had a bra. There was also some type of sport tights, like a yoga pants, but not full length. It was, I think it's somewhere like up to the knees. And may I look to see what
Yes,
what
sir.
else is,
Yes, sir.
was present? So she had on, and also flip-flops.
Okay.
And that's it.
Okay. Were these items removed from Ms. Colley and turned over to Chris Keegan with the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office?
Yes.
Now, Dr. Bulic, I want to take you, we're going to start with the autopsy on Amanda Colley. I want to take you to photograph A, and can you tell us basically what this is a photograph of here?
Yeah, I see just basically the face and the neck of the victim, Miss Collins, and also there's an identification number that we assign to the case.
And photograph B, what are we looking at here?
On this photograph, we see the head and upper portion of the body with arms that are also covered with paper bags to preserve the evidence, and also the lower portion of the body, and mostly just the pelvis and the legs.
Right, and we see she has clothing on here. These are the same clothing that you were referring to earlier.
That's correct.
And is this, I see there's, it appears that she's in a blue body bag. Is that correct?
Yes, this is the body bag that the transport service uses to transport the body.
Okay, and this is really to depict exactly how she appeared to you upon opening the body bag. Is that right?
Yes, the bags, the body bags are always sealed, and we have to break the seal in order to seal the body the way it's, and then we photograph it right away So these photographs are the very first look that we had, just the way it appeared to us when the body bag was opened.
And you've already indicated that the clothing was removed, it was turned over to the sheriff's office. After the clothing was removed, did you observe any evidence of injuries to Amanda Colley's body?
Yes, after the collection of the evidence and disrobing or removing the clothing, then we also washed the residual blood that was covering the body. Then we were able to observe a number of gunshot wounds on the body.
Okay. I'm showing you photograph C from this presentation. What does this, and there's also a photograph, an inset photograph within that larger one. Can you tell us what we're looking at in this photograph here?
We're looking at the almost the entire victim's body with multiple gunshot wounds that are labeled with the legs.
Dr. Bulic, how many individual gunshot wounds, and when we're talking about gunshot wounds that are traceable to a single gunshot, were found on Amanda Colley's body?
There were a total of 9.
Now, we just to kind of differentiate and so that everybody understands, is it true that there were more than 9 wounds, but these were 9 wounds that were traceable to 9 different gunshots?
That's correct. There's some entrances and exits, but that counts as 1. So total of 9 gunshot wounds. There will be more if we count also entrances and exits. So some bullets did not exit, so there will be just 1 wound, single wound. But if there's an entrance and exit, then there will be 2. However, we don't count the exits, so we just count the 9 gunshots received.
Did you also have injuries where there was an entrance, an exit, and a re-entrance wound?
Yes.
Now, I want to take you, in this photograph here, we see sort of the constellation of injuries to her body. I'd like to take you through a lot of these individually. First, I want to ask you, are you able to determine the exact sequence individually of each of these shots?
Not, forensic pathology is not, at this point, is not able to determine the order in which the wounds are received. And so this is basically impossible scientifically to determine that. However, there are some certain instances where certain trajectories and the paths of the projectile through the body can imply a certain order. For example, if the bullet passed through the spinal cord and it would render a person paralyzed, then it would not be received prior defensive injuries on the hands and legs, which means that if the person was rendered paralyzed, we would say, well, that wound was received after all the injuries to the hands and legs, because that person was still able to defend themselves by putting the extremities in front of the weapon. So we know that at that point, the injuries to the hands and legs were received first. So in that kind of logic, we can actually extrapolate and scientifically guess which is the order of the wounds, but not for every single wound.
Okay. And so there's some groupings of these gunshots that you are able to determine by process of deduction occurred before others. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I'd like to start with what appears on the screen as photograph D. There also appears to be a marker next to a wound that's also marked D. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can you tell us, Dr. Bulic, what, I know there's a little bit difficult maybe from, just because it's this may have been shot. Can you tell us what part of the body of Amanda Colley this injury is located? First, tell us what kind of injury it is, and then tell us where it's located on her body.
Should I stand up?
You may, and there's actually a pointer there. You can extend it out however long you need it, doctor.
So this is the gunshot we labeled with the letter D. The belly button is here, is covered with a ruler. So in order to orient the jury to the where is the location of that wound, this is the entire thing is abdomen with the belly button in the.
Sorry.
We can actually go to the.
Okay. Go back to the C.
So which I can point this wound, actually it's right here. So you can see where the belly button is, and the wound is on the right side of the, somewhere in the middle of the abdomen. So this abdomen, in the middle of the abdomen. And we can go back to the larger one.
All right. Going back to photograph D, doctor, did you have anything else you wanted to point out?
Just wanted to show that that's a typical circular entrance. It's punched in, and it shows a little bit of abrasion, and the abrasion is a little bit wider on this side than on that side. So it means the bullet was coming in a downward direction.
Okay. And doctor, is it part of the process when you observe these wounds, gunshot wounds in this particular example, that you would measure the wound to determine its diameter?
Yes, we always measure the diameter of any injury. The size of the wound is telling.
Okay. And what was the diameter of this wound here, pictured in photograph D?
I believe it was 0.6 centimeters, and that's had to be translated in inches, or...
That's sufficient.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you,
0.6 centimeters.
Thank you, sir. Was there any evidence, Dr. Bulic, that there was that this gunshot wound occurred from a close distance?
This is a distant range wound because it lacks the evidence of contact or close range. When we determined the range of the gunshot wound, we have those three categories. One is the contact, which is very different than anything else. It has a lot of searing, a lot of soot, and sometimes there's a muzzle imprint on the skin. So it's like you can never mistake the contact from anything else. Then there's a close range, which has a lot of stippling or powder tattooing on the skin. So it's a lot of dots that are basically burn particles emerging from the muzzle and burning the skin. The hot burning particles coming from the muzzle would literally tattoo the skin in the form of multiple dots. So that's the characteristic of close range firing. That's usually between a few inches up to about 2 feet distance. That's considered close range firing. And then anything above 2 to 3 feet is distant range, or it could be 15 yards or it could be 3 feet. We cannot distinguish the distance.
Doctor, would clothing have the effect of preventing that stippling, as you were indicating, it would be evidence of a close range gunshot? Would that have the effect of preventing some of that material from tattooing the skin as you described?
Clothing would prevent or filter out the stippling or that cloud of hot gas coming out and hitting the skin, causing the stippling, would be filtered out. And The contact range could never be filtered out. That would be always seen even if somebody's shot through the clothing. However, the close range would be diminished in appearance. It could appear as distant.
Right. And with regard to all these injuries, just so I don't have to ask you the question with each one, was there any evidence on any of the injuries of a contact or close distance range?
No, I have not seen any evidence of that.
When the bullet, were you able to determine sort of the track of the wound here as it entered the skin and kind of where it went from there?
Yes.
And what
yes,
kind of damage it did internally?
Yes, we always determine that every gunshot is, depending on what the location of the bullet was recovered or if it passed through the body, we always follow from the entrance to the exit, we would follow the track and determine the direction of the projectile and also all injuries that were associated with that projectile.
Okay, let's talk first about the track. Was there also an exit wound associated with this wound here?
This one exited on the back.
Okay, and were you able to determine the track as it passed through the body? Was it up, down, left, right? Were you able to determine that as you
Yes,
observed those injuries?
I was.
And what did you determine, doctor?
So the track we call basically all the organs that we can line up and where the projectile passed through. That's the track. The direction of the projectile is whether it's going upward, downward, left or right.
Okay.
And so in terms of direction, the projectile was traveling from right to left and slightly downward and also front to back.
Okay. And you're able to determine that how? In terms of slightly downward, how do you make the determination of that?
Well, if you measure the position of this entrance from the top of the head and then position of the exit from the same top of the head, then you will see that the exit was lower than the entrance. So that means the projectile is traveling through the body downward.
Okay. And what was the difference between the entrance wound and the exit wound in terms of distance from the top of the head?
We'll have to look that up.
Yes, sir, you please do.
So the projectile entered the body at the level of 65 centimeters below the top of the head. And it exited the body at the level of 66 centimeters below the top of the head. So the difference is only 1 centimeter lower.
Okay.
So if the entrance is, as we see, is right here, then the exit on the back would be 1 centimeter lower, which is 1 centimeter is here, this much from here to here. So the exit would be approximately this low. However, on the opposite side of the back, so which is the left side. This is the right side, it's the left side on the back.
So when you say it was downward, it's only slightly downward?
Slightly down.
Okay, almost horizontal.
Almost horizontal, yes.
Would that be consistent with assuming that the shooter is standing up? Would that be consistent with the victim standing up at the time that they were shot?
Yes, most likely scenario because we see other projectiles going at the very steep angles, which that means that there was a change in the position of the body. But if the victim is facing the shooter by standing, most likely the entrances will be perpendicular to the body. There could be slight upward or downward angle depending on of because shooting is never static. It's a very dynamic scene where both bodies are moving at the same time. And so there's always certain angles, whether it's downward or upward, or left or right. But generally speaking, this would be almost perpendicular entrance. However, there was a angle to that entrance, which is from right to left, and the exit was on the left side of the back. So it's not like this straight perpendicular, but it was at the angle, and the exit was on the opposite side.
But it passed through her body almost at a horizontal angle, is that correct?
Correct.
I want to go to photograph E here, and can you tell us what we're looking at there?
This photograph shows the exit that we were talking about of this same wound. It's on the left side. This is the left hip. And the exit is ragged. You can definitely recognize the exit as not being circle and not being punched in, but more like the bullet is tumbling through the body and coming out and tearing the skin, forming this like a star-shaped laceration.
All right. And Dr. Bulic, you conducted an internal examination on Amanda Colley as well as the external that we're sort of going over now, correct?
Yes.
Were you able to determine what injuries she suffered internally as a result of this gunshot wound?
So the projectile passed through the abdominal wall and grazed the liver, the lower edge of the liver. Then it passed through the bowels, the small bowel loops. We have many of them, and it passed through several loops. And then the projectile continued to pass into the muscle on the back and then exited.
How would you describe these injuries in terms of lethality? Was this injury lethal? If so, was it immediately lethal? If not, how long? How would you describe it?
So this is a gut shot, basically, and the big danger is more of an infection at a later time, such as if there's a bowel perforation, there's a content of the bowel that is spilled out and cause sepsis or infection that the person can die unless it's being surgically operated on, and then those bowel loops that are being perforated are being stitched up, and also a lot of antibiotics in it. So to answer that question, there's nothing immediately lethal in this wound. However, there's a danger for another 24 hours, 48 hours sepsis.
Let me go to photograph F here, and this it's photograph F, but you have a marker there indicating a gunshot wound B. Can you tell us what we're looking at in this photograph?
So this is one of those injuries that I would classify as defensive injuries, because the victim raised the hand in front of the vital part of the body. So the left hand was raised this way, covering the breast, or the vital part where the heart is. And then the projectile entered the forearm, which is right here, and exited through the the fleshy part of the forearm. So entrance, exit, and then re-entrance into the breast.
And what was the direction of this gunshot wound?
The direction is obviously front to back, and then also curiously there was a downward direction, so it was going so downward through the body. After re-entered, he went down. So the entrance was through the arm, through the forearm, the soft tissue of the forearm, then re-entered. However, it was at the downward angle. So either the shooter will have to be like higher, or the victim was bending. So then it would create that downward trajectory, and most likely that's the answer why it's going downward. Because in instances where they're shooting, usually the victim twists or bends in order to decrease the size of themselves being a target. So they either minimize the size by twisting or bending in order to protect the vital parts.
Was there an exit wound associated with this gunshot?
There is no exit wound. The projectile was recovered inside the body.
Okay. And go to photograph G here. What are we looking at here in this photograph, doctor?
This is the X-ray or radiograph of the torso. We see the wires from the bra here, so that can orient you from saying that. So these are the breasts here, the ribs and the spinal column, and here is the projectile in a circle. The metallic projectile that is seen on the X-ray.
Okay. And was that projectile, were you able to remove that from Amanda Colley's body?
Yes.
And was that turned over to the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office?
Yes.
What can you tell us, Dr. Bulic, in terms of the lethality of this gunshot wound?
So we know that the entrance, we saw the entrance, or should I call it re-entrance, after it passed through the forearm. It re-entered the breast, the left breast, and then it traveled to where it received. So along this path, there's several important organs, such as the chest cavities here. Then the diaphragm is right here. So it passed through the diaphragm, entered the abdomen, and passed through the liver, also the stomach. Then the upper pole of the kidney on the left side. We have two kidneys, right and left. So kidney is approximately here. So it passed through the kidney, and then it was lodged on the back, just under the skin.
Okay. Like the first gunshot wound that we talked about, was that also not immediately lethal?
This is not immediately lethal because it's passing through. Every time there's a immediately incapacitating or even rapidly lethal wound, where we have to pass through the vital organs such as brain, heart, or big vessel, like the largest artery in the body is aorta. If you pass through the aorta, then you'll just immediately drop. Or pass it through the heart or brain. So this wound is not rapidly lethal.
Okay. It would be lethal at some point in time, though. Is that correct?
At some point, because it passed through the liver, so there will be a hemorrhage. Liver is very vascular, has a lot of vessels, and that it can bleed intra-abdominally unless it's stitched up. Also, there is the stomach content was spilled through a bullet passed through the stomach, and that can be also, it's not sterile, so it would cause sepsis as well. So it would eventually, like 24 or 48 hours, it will cause death if there is no medical assistance.
Is it a survivable wound?
Yes.
I'm going to go to the next photograph, which is photograph H. Is this the bullet that we saw in the X-ray in the previous photograph?
That's correct. This is the deformed projectile. You see a copper jacket that is bunched up, and also the core lead projectile, which is in the center.
I'm going to go to photograph I, Dr. Bulic. Can you tell us what we are looking at in this photograph?
We labeled this wound as A. Again, that was arbitrary labeling because it's not in the order that we think that this occurred. So the location is this is the breast tissue here. We see a little bit of imprint from the bra, and so this is the right breast here, and at the base of the right breast, right towards the middle, where the breastplate is, there's a gunshot wound.
Okay. And real quickly, you pointed out the imprint from the bra. Can you explain how that would be caused?
Anything like if the person was clothed in a certain material that is a little harsher, such as like wires in the bra or something, or like if a person has something in the pocket, such as a watch or anything else metallic, it would, because of the proximity of the projectile entering the body, it's so-called percussive effect of the bullet on the body. So these hard objects on the skin would leave imprint because of the kinetic energy of the projectile in the proximity of that hard object would cause the imprint of that object on the skin.
Okay, thank you, doctor. All right, returning to our discussion about the gunshot wound there that's labeled A on photograph I. Can you tell us, what can you tell us about that wound there, doctor?
We see a classic entrance, punched in, circular, with an abrasion ring around, which is pretty much in almost in all directions, kind of equal, maybe wider on this side, but that's because of the breast tissue is raising right at this point. It's raising upward, so it's causing a little more abrasion here. This is the basically, if you're interested in the direction and the track.
I will, and let me just ask you, okay, just to clarify, is this an entrance wound or an exit wound?
This is an entrance.
Okay, was there an exit wound associated with this gunshot wound?
There is an exit as well on the back.
Okay. I'm going to go to photograph J. Can you tell us, is this the exit wound here?
This is the exit wound that is associated with the wound that we just saw. And it's also on the right side of the back, approximately the same level.
Okay, when you say the same level, what do you mean?
I would have to look up exactly whether it's upward or downward, but approximately almost horizontally traveling through the right side of the chest.
Okay, and so just to kind of follow up on that, similar to my question with regard to the other gunshot wound that you indicated had passed almost horizontal, would that also be consistent with the victim standing facing the shooter, assuming that the shooter was also standing?
Yes, it is.
And what can you tell us, Dr. Bulic, in terms of the lethality of this shot?
This projectile passed through the right side of the chest, just slightly inside of the breast, and continued to travel through the lung, and then exited on the back. So the only vital organ is the right lung, which is it's a very important organ for breathing. So it would cause such a gunshot wound would cause the lungs to collapse, and there was also hemorrhage in the lungs, which is then associated with difficulty to breathe, which could double because the lungs collapse. So it's not immediately a lethal shot. However, this needs to be acted really fast. If it's the only shot received, within half an hour, the patient can die.
Okay. If, assuming it was the only gunshot that the victim had suffered and they did receive treatment within that half hour, would it have been a survivable shot?
I believe so, yes.
I want to go to the next photograph, which is photograph K. What are we looking at in photograph K?
We are looking at a wound that was received on the left palm, right under the thumb, or at the base of the left thumb. This is the entrance wound. And you see the thumb here and the rest of the fingers.
And going to photo L, what are we looking at here?
We see the exit of the same wound. So the entrance was somewhere right here, and the exit was on the opposite side of the thumb, on the back of the thumb. So that's that entrance was approximately here at the base of the left thumb, and it exited on the back of the thumb. In the process, it fractured the joint, so the joint was completely lax and detached. I would consider that as another defensive wound, because the victim is usually at being shot at, would put hands in front of the weapon to protect the rest of the body. And it's, again, distant range because there was no soot or stippling on the skin.
All right, moving to photograph M. Is this just another photograph of that same injury?
This is the same injury, just the exit and showing the joint, the cartilage here, that basically detached from the rest of the thumb.
Moving to photograph N, can you kind of orient us on what part of the body this is on Amanda Colley and what we're looking at in the photograph?
So, this is the right lower thigh. The knee is approximately here, or approximately here. The feet are this way, and the rest of the thigh is this way. So this is the right side of the lower thigh, right just above the knee. This I consider, again, another defensive injury where the person would lift either arms or legs or knees to protect the body, the vital parts of the body from injury.
Going to photograph O, do we see that same injury in this photograph here?
We just saw that wound, just larger magnification previously, and that's the same wound right here. So you can see better now that this is the right leg. The knee is right here, and we see the entrance, typical entrance wound without evidence of contact or close range firing. And we see the exit wound of the same projectile. The projectile passed through the soft tissue only, not through the bone or any major vessel.
Okay, and moving to photograph P, is this that same exit wound that you were just pointing out?
That's a larger view of the same exit wound.
And then photograph Q, can you tell us kind of what we're looking at here? What was the purpose of this?
Here is just one of many photographs that we demonstrate the path of the projectile through the certain parts of the body, such as, in this case, we put a probe through the track, showing that it's only soft tissue wound. If there was a bone in the path or even fractured bone, we would not be able to put a probe in. So it's just a soft tissue injury.
Okay. Now, Doctor, you described these wounds as defensive in nature. I think you described, the Amanda Colley putting sort of her leg up to sort of protect herself, at least in an attempt to protect herself. What would be the natural explanation where she's at, standing up, laying down, in order to position herself in a way where these gunshots would have entered her body the way that they did.
So in this case, we see three almost parallel gunshots that are passing through the leg. And the entrances are on the side of the right leg. And this is just a graze, just the skin and fat under the skin. And this one passed through the actual entire knee, through the joint. But just looking at the tracks and directions, the directionality of the wound, of these three wounds, show that implies the position of the raised knee across the body. And if that happened, that scenario, the only explanation is if she was sitting and having her knee raised across her vital parts.
Sitting or laying down?
Either sitting or laying down, yes.
All right, and let me just, before I start having you talk about this next photograph, with regard to the gunshot wound to the hand that you had pointed out before, and all of these gunshot wounds to Amanda Colley's right leg, were any of those lethal?
Is any of them...
Were any of those gunshot wounds, either to her hand or to her legs, her right leg, were any of those lethal?
No, that's very obvious there is not. Just passing through, they passed through the thumb, one of them passed through the thumb, and there's three wounds passed through the soft tissue and the knee. So none of them are lethal.
Okay, thank you, doctor. And okay, now here on photograph R, I think we saw the same injury in the previous photo, but this is a close-up of that graze wound, is that correct?
Yes, and it's just here is a different orientation, so the entrance is really clear, and this is a graze wound. The bullet was traveling from here and just grazing the skin, and then continued to travel. It's a minimal wound, basically we can call it a scratch.
All right, moving here to photograph S. Can you tell us what we're looking at in this photograph?
This is the entrance wound under the right knee, on the side of the right knee. It's going upward, we can tell because there's an abrasion at 6 o'clock, and it's traveling this way.
And was there an exit wound associated with this gunshot wound?
There's an exit associated with this one, and it's on the opposite side of the knee, slightly above the knee. So the projectile goes through the knee joint.
And photograph T here, this gives you sort of more of an orientation of where that gunshot wound is located. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the wound that we were discussing previously, and we don't see the exit, but it's on the opposite side of that knee.
Okay. And photograph U, what is this?
That's the exit wound on the opposite side of the same leg.
All right, moving to photograph V, can you tell us what portion of Amanda Colley's body this is and what we're looking at?
This is an entrance wound. It's labeled C.
Okay. And what part of her, Amanda Colley's body, was this gunshot wound found on?
I believe that this, since we see there is a little bit of breast tissue here, this is in the abdomen.
Okay. And can you tell us, Dr. Bulic, in terms of the direction of travel first, before I ask you that question, let me ask you this. Was there an exit wound associated with this gunshot wound?
No, there's no exit wound. We covered the projectile in the body.
Okay. Were you able to determine the direction of travel as the projectile passed through Amanda Colley's body after it entered in this location?
Yes, it did.
Okay, what was the direction of that gunshot wound?
So just by looking at the wound, since it's elongated, it will tell you that the entrance is not perpendicular like this. If the entrance is this way, then you would have really punched in a hole that is actually round. However, we are seeing here elongated wound. So that means there was a steep angle of the projectile traveling and hitting the body. So the best is to explain this is looking at this abrasion here, and then finally entrance. The projectile traveled from 6 o'clock towards 12 o'clock. And on my body will be this basically a very steep upward angle through the body.
Okay. What would that indicate to you? You said it was a very steep upward angle. What would that indicate to you, doctor, in terms of positioning of the victim and the shooter?
So the only explanation to that is that the victim was down, almost horizontal.
As if she was on the floor or the ground?
Yes.
What type of injuries did you find internally, and how would you describe the lethality of this shot?
So the projectile traveled upward. This is the upper abdomen, and right under the skin is liver. So it passed through the liver and then continued to travel upward into the chest cavity, hitting the right lung, and passed through the lung. There are 3 lobes of the lung passed through the at least 2 lobes of the lung. So it's a long travel through the lungs. And then also, I believe it was the 5th rib on the back was fractured. So that's where the projectile hit that rib, and it got lodged in the soft tissue on the back, but it's in the upper back. So from the entrance here to the projectile was found up here. So it's a steep upward angle.
Okay. And in terms of how lethal this shot was, how would you describe that?
It's a pretty serious injury. I'd say the liver was shot and lacerated by the projectile, which would cause a lot of bleeding, and the lung was also shot through, so that would cause another additional bleeding. So I would say if it's received by just alone with no other wounds, it would be not immediately lethal. However, there will be a real danger of losing a lot of blood relatively quickly. So I'm not certain that it's survivable, because it's 2 vital organs were shot through and lacerated. So it would, by the time EMS, or if this is the only wound, and by the time EMS arrives and they stabilize the patient and get him to ER, it would be it'll be maybe too long.
But in terms of immediacy, this was not an immediately lethal wound, is that correct?
Not immediately. As I said, only brain or large vessel or heart would cause that.
I want to go to photograph W, Dr. Bulic, and what are we looking at here in this photograph?
We are looking at the circle projectile that was found. We were discussing that, just the upward angle of traveling and where the projectile was found on the upper back. And that's what how it appeared to us on the x-ray. So it was in the back of the soft tissue that was identified.
And photograph X, is this the projectile that was removed from her at that location?
Yes, that's the projectile that we labeled letter C.
And moving to photograph Y, Can you tell us what we're looking at in this photograph?
We see another gunshot entrance wound, and I would classify this as a defensive injury again because it's on the right hand, right below the wrist. This is the wrist, and the entrance is right below the wrist, on the side of the hand.
And photograph Z, what do we see here?
We see the exit, so if the entrance was here, we see the exit. So the projectile passed through the wrist, literally slightly upward. It entered below the wrist and then exited above the wrist on the opposite side.
And photograph double A, what is this injury here, this picture?
That's a re-entry. So the decedent had that's why I said that it was defensive injury, because the decedent had an arm up here, and the projectile passed through the right hand below the wrist, exited above the wrist, and then entered the neck.
And was there a exit wound associated with this gunshot wound?
So there's an exit on the opposite side of the neck. It's high up in the neck. This is the ear, so it's towards the back of the neck and high up.
What was the direction of travel on this gunshot wound, doctor?
It was front to back and also right to left and upward.
Okay. In terms of the injuries that this gunshot wound caused to Amanda Colley's body, could you describe those injuries?
This is immediately lethal. Even though it passed through the wrist, the right wrist, that's not lethal. However, it re-entered into the neck and then passed through the carotid artery, the right carotid artery, which is a very thick, maybe a finger thick artery that delivers a lot of blood to the brain. So that if that's severed, the death is rapid. Then, however, there's more to it. The projectile also passed through the spinal cord and severed the spinal cord. So at that point, the victim would be paralyzed from the neck down.
Okay, so she would essentially, assuming that she had survived these multitude of injuries, she would have been a quadriplegic, is that correct?
Yes.
And what impact would that have had on her ability to raise her legs, put her arms up in order to defend herself in any way?
So we know that she would not be able to do that if we think that that's the wound that came first. She would not be able to lift her arms or knee up to protect herself.
Okay. And she also, doctor, she would not also be able to stand, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So with regard to the gunshot wounds that indicate that she was standing at the time that she received them, and the gunshot wounds that indicate that she was at least making some efforts to defend herself with her legs and hands, those all would have had to have come before this gunshot wound here, is that correct?
Yes, I agree with that.
In terms of these gunshot wounds, particularly the defensive injuries, what do those injuries tell us in terms of Amanda Colley's consciousness throughout her receiving these gunshot wounds?
She was aware. She had knowledge of what's happening and through the entire shooting process.
Okay. In terms of physical pain, what kind of physical pain would she have been suffering as a result of any of these gunshot wounds?
Well, we know that the skin has a lot of pain receptors, so anything that causes damage to the skin would cause pain. Deeper organs have much less pain receptors. So, however, in order to get to the damage that is causing that is caused by the deeper organs such as liver, lungs, or even abdominal organs, bowels, they would not be as painful, but in order to get to them, the projectile goes through the skin. So it would be hurting the victim.
What about the gunshot wounds, the projectiles as they pass through? I know you said the ones that passed through the hand went through the thumb joint. The ones the one that went through the knee went through her knee joint. Some of the ones to her torso struck and fractured ribs. What about injuries to bones and things like that? Would those have caused pain and suffering?
Yes, those are especially cartilage, and the joints would cause pain because they have pain receptors. So most of these defensive injuries would be very painful. Also, the gut shot is painful because the bowels have a lot of pain receptors, especially stretching or tearing would cause pain.
Dr. Bulic, were you able to, and you can take your seat again, thank you, for at least a few moments. Dr. Bulic, were you able to determine the cause of Amanda Colley's death as a result of your autopsy?
Yes,
And what was the cause of her death?
multiple gunshot wounds.
And were you able to determine the manner of her death?
Yes,
And what was the manner of her death?
homicide.
And when we use the word homicide, does that mean her death was caused by another human being?
That's exactly right. It's the death that is caused by another person. We don't have any other implication to that. We have courts and judicial system to decide the guilt or even to call it a homicide. But this is a conventional for medical examiners. Any death that is caused by another human being would be called homicide.
All right, thank you, Dr. Bulic. I'd like to move on to your autopsy of Lindy Dobbins. And I thank you.
Stop one second. Everybody has your view here? Anybody? Good. Okay, let's keep going, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Your Honor. I think you had indicated earlier that you had performed Lindy Dobbins' autopsy later that afternoon, the same day that you conducted Amanda Colley's autopsy. Is that correct?
Yes,
Was Lindy Dobbins' body clothed at the time that you received it?
yes, she was.
Okay. And at some point, was her clothing removed and turned over to the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office?
Yes, the same protocol applies to every victim.
Okay. Did you notice anything unusual about her clothing, doctor? Did they have any defects or anything of that nature?
I would have to look up regarding clothing, but I remember she had certain gunshot wounds that were not covered by clothing. I'm just not sure about the shoulder gunshot wound, whether that passed through the T-shirt.
Okay. Would you check your check your report and your notes, doctor?
No, there was no projectile passed through any clothing item.
All right. I'd like to move to photograph double C. Can you tell us, Dr. Bulic, what we're looking at here?
We are looking at the face of the deceased victim.
All right. And did you observe any injuries to the body of Lindy Dobbins when you began her autopsy and removed her clothing?
Yes.
And what kind of injuries did you observe to her body?
She had 3 gunshot wounds.
And where were they located?
One was on the right temple. Second one was on the right shoulder, and the third one was on the left foot.
I want to go to photo DD. Can you tell us what we're looking at in this photograph, sir?
This is the photograph of the decedent when we just opened the bag at that time, and then we snapped those photographs of the top portion of the body and the rest of the body.
And this is Lindy Dobbins as she was received at the medical examiner's office, is that correct?
Yes.
I want to go to photograph EE. And can you tell us what we're looking at in this photograph, Doctor?
We see the
Yes, sir, you can.
We see the area where she was shot. This is the left foot, and the entrance wound is at the base of the great toe.
And was that an entrance wound or an exit wound?
That's an entrance wound.
And was there an exit wound associated with this injury?
There is also there's an exit wound on the opposite side. So at the side of the sole of the foot. So if the entrance was up here at where the great toe is, the top of the great toe, I mean not the top of the great toe, the base of the great toe, but on the dorsal side. And that's the plantar side of the left foot where the exit is.
And while we're here, can you just tell the members of the jury, what damage did this gunshot wound cause internally to this foot?
The projectile traveled basically from the base of the great toe to the side of the foot and fractured the bones along the path. And those are four toes. The fifth toe was not fractured, so all 4 toes were fractured by the projectile.
Going here to photograph double G, what area of this is on Lindy Dobbins as we're looking at, and what injuries did you observe here?
So this is the right shoulder gunshot wound entrance. We see the head there, and basically the beginning of the arm. That's the shoulder, somewhere in between the end of the shoulder and the neck, so almost in the middle of the shoulder.
And was there an exit wound associated with this gunshot wound?
There is no exit wound. We recovered the bullet within the body. I just want to mention there's an abrasion that is showing. If this is the right side, that's the left side. So there's more abrasion on the right, so which indicates the direction of the projectile from right to left and downward.
Okay. Right to left and downward.
Yes.
And what would that indicate to you, doctor, if this is at the shoulder level and it is going downward? What would that indicate to you?
So it's interesting that it's actually also very steep downward track and diagonal across the body. So that's so literally it's traveling like this towards the opposite side of the body and downward. But when we say downward, we mean in regard to the victim, not in regard to the photograph that we are looking at.
Okay. Would that be consistent with her being shot while she is on the floor in a downward angle?
So since this is very steep downward, it's consistent with a shooter being above the victim, literally, and it's quite steep. So the shooter would have to be like right above the victim.
Moving here to double H, what are we looking at in this photograph, doctor?
So this is an X-ray of the torso, the chest. We see a faint outline on the ribs. This is the right side of the chest, left side of the chest. We see the wires from the bra. And there's a projectile that was associated with that entrance wound that we see in the right shoulder. So you can actually see now the downward path. So right to left and downward.
Thank you, doctor. All right, moving here to photograph double I.
I'm sorry. We didn't talk about the lethality of the injury.
Okay, yes, we'll go back. Yes, I'd like to ask you that question. What can you tell us about the lethality of this injury?
This is a rapidly lethal injury. And the reason for that is the projectile passed through the shoulder, but then it entered the lung. It fractured the collarbone, which is not that, it's painful, however, it's not lethal. And then the projectile passed through the lung, then passed through the windpipe in the middle, then also passed through the aorta. And aorta is the largest artery in the human body. So anything that damages the aorta, such as a bullet or knife, would cause immediate drop of blood pressure, and the person would lose consciousness within a couple of minutes. And then the projectile also passed through the other lung, and it was recovered on the soft tissue on the side of the body.
And that projectile was recovered from the body and also turned over to the sheriff's office?
Correct.
And photograph double I, what are we looking at here?
This is a gunshot wound to the right temple, and this is immediately lethal injury. It's passing through the brain, causing immediate loss of consciousness. And it's also going steeply downward. It's passing through, so the entrance is the right temple, and it's a downward angle, would pass through the right hemisphere of the brain, and that would pass through the back of the mouth, and it would exit on the opposite side of the neck.
And moving here to, I think this actually probably was accidentally also labeled double I, but it's the second of those photographs. What are we looking at in that photograph?
This is the exit wound of that temple wound that we just saw. So the entrance is on the opposite temple, so like around here, but on the opposite side. So this is an exit on the left side of the neck.
Here, double J, this is just simply a close-up of that same exit wound?
Yes.
And photograph double L, is this the bullet that was that we had previously talked about that was found associated with the gunshot wound to the shoulder?
Yes, that's correct. That's the bullet that was retrieved on the side of the left side of the torso.
All right, and just one more photograph here, double M. What are we looking at here, Dr. Bulic?
This is the X-ray of the head. We were looking at whether an entire bullet passed through and exited on the opposite side of the neck, or there were some still fragments remaining, and there were some along the path. There were some fragments of basically it was a copper jacket, but not entire, just small pieces of copper jacket, but sheared off along the path.
And were those fragments also removed and turned over with the other projectiles to the sheriff's office?
Yes, they were.
I have one moment, Your Honor.
Sure.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Shoot, I can go with cross-examination.
Very quickly, Your Honor. Doctor, as far as the order and the two wounds on Lindy Dobbins, can you tell which was first, whether the one in the temple or the one in the shoulder?
Not possible to really determine. In general terms, usually this happens, the shooting usually happens in a rapid succession, so which one came first is very hard to tell. And if it happened within seconds, then we would not be able to tell. But if it happened with a delay, then I would say that since both are lethal, then it would cause like a really quick collapse of the individual. So if the gunshot wound to the temple came first, that person would immediately drop. Then I think the second wound to the shoulder would be harder to make in that kind of, to create that kind of direction through the body.
What if the person was already crouched down in that position and never changed positions? Then both could happen simultaneously like that?
It's possible, yeah. So I would not be comfortable to say that this is which one came first.
And if the gunshot wound to the temple was the first one, it would have been immediate death and no suffering at all, correct?
Correct, yes.
As far as the distance, both of those shots were considered distant shots, is that correct?
I believe so. Just there was a lack of evidence for contact or close range.
May I have 1 second?
Sure.
We're done here.
And redirect.
Just very briefly, Dr. Bulic, Mr. Shoemaker was asking you about these gunshot wounds to Lindy Dobbins being at distance range. Would the clothing, say for example the shirt that she was wearing and the hair that was on her head, could that have concealed any evidence of close range gunshot?
So the clothing is if there's a hole on the shirt regarding the shoulder gunshot wound, then it's possible that the clothing can filter out some of the evidence. The temple, there's no clothing, however, there's a hair. So the hair can also filter out some of that. But we would see some evidence on the ear, because ear is not covered by hair, so or the cheek. So there was some stippling on the uncovered areas, the ones that hair does not cover. So I'll say less likely that there was close or contact range.
Okay. So it would have some effect, is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any recross?
No, you're on.
Yes, Dr. Bulic, excused.
I want to retain him, but he's free to go about his business.
You are subject to recall. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and take our mid-afternoon recess at this point. It's 25 minutes till 3. Let's be ready to come back at 5 minutes till 3. We'll give you 20 minutes. If you go longer, just let the deputies know and let me know. Again, don't discuss the case among yourselves.